guys, I'm here today with Cheryl from Nonstop Paris. We are both expats in Paris right now. Obviously you guys know I'm from the US and Cheryl's from the UK. Where in the UK?
I'm from Bournemouth, but I've spent quite a few years living in London, so.
We both have been in Paris since about November-ish. So today we're going to talk about some of our likes and dislikes in Paris in our about 6 months of being here. So do you want to start us off with a like?
Sure, okay, so I've got them all written down here on my phone in my notes. And the first one is very, very cliche and obvious, but just the fact that everything in Paris is just beautiful and wonderful. It's like a picture postcard, but just consistently throughout the city.
That's actually what someone told me the other day. I posted a picture on, I think, Facebook, and someone commented and just said, you are literally living in a postcard. And it's true. Like,
It is.
Basically, you turn the corner and you find something else that's just absolutely stunning, and it's not in the touristy part of Paris. It's not something that tons of people have photographed even, but it's just beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I can't really compare it to any other city that I've been to. In London, you've got a lot of beautiful buildings and amazing places, but you've also got a lot of the in-between bits, which is just very average. So there's definitely that element to Paris. Like, everywhere you go is beautiful.
Something that I really like, and maybe you've heard this before if you've read about Paris, but the public transportation. So much of Paris is accessible by the metro, and if not the metro, then you have the RER, and if not that, you have trams and buses. You have a night bus that literally runs all night. I mean, I've never had to take a taxi. I've never had to take an Uber. I've always had some sort of access to something, which is something that I don't find in a lot of other places.
Yeah. I mean, coming from London, where their metro or underground is supposed to be one of the best in the world, I definitely have to agree with you that Paris is a lot more convenient, because even though it's not always the most beautiful metro, because the London Underground, it has a lot of really strong branding and most of the stations are all quite well kitted out. It can be quite difficult to get from A to B. Sometimes you have to go to A to B to C to D to get where you want to go, especially if you don't want to go somewhere central. You have to kind of go into central and then back out, whereas in Paris there's generally multiple different routes of getting to different places, and it all ends up that you're getting there quite directly, which is really good. I don't think I've really spent more than 30 minutes on one journey, even if you're going from one side to the other.
I've noticed that when I leave before going to a new place, I'll just automatically assume it's going to take half an hour. I don't even before I've looked up the actual trajectory and how long it's going to take me, I just assume it'll be about 30 minutes, maybe 20, maybe 40, but it's going to be around 30 minutes.
So the next thing for me, on my list of likes is, you might be able to tell from my apartment, this definitely came into play when I was choosing my apartment, but I am very much into like the Haussmannian interior style and exterior style, let's face it. My flat isn't a Haussmannian building, but the interior definitely has that vibe. Just the way that the room is kind of laid out, and you've got the embellishments and the big windows and the balconies and stuff. I just can't get enough of it.
The big windows I absolutely love. Okay, I'm gonna mix it up with a dislike now, because I don't want to put all the dislikes at the end and end on that terrible note. One thing that I dislike in Paris is kind of stereotypical, but it's that everything is so crowded. It's not just something that people say. It literally, Paris is one of the tightest cities I've ever experienced. When you go into restaurants, a lot of times will barely have space in between tables. Like, I'm not that big of a person, but I feel like a lumbering giant sometimes when I'm in cafes and restaurants. Everything is very tightly packed. And that's kind of standard, I know, in cities because there's not a lot of space, but Paris is by far the tightest and most jam-packed city I've ever been in.
Yeah, that's true, because even though London has much bigger population, it's a lot less densely populated.
Right. Parisians know how to maximize their use of space. They can fit so many people in such a tight little area.
Well, people have those beds that kind of flap up to the wall so that they can actually use.
Yeah, like mobile beds, and like I know people who use like couch beds, like extendable.
And that's their actual bed.
Yeah.
It's not just the guest bed or the... So I'm going to go in with the dislike as well, which is actually quite controversial because it's going against what you said, and it's the metro.
Okay.
So my dislike is the metro, not because it's not convenient and it's not very useful, but it's more what goes with it. If you buy a ticket for the metro for the week, you have to buy it on a Monday, because otherwise, say if you go and buy it on a Wednesday, it will expire on the Sunday, so you only get like those 5 days use out of it.
Yeah.
Don't know what it's like in the US, but in London, if you buy a weekly pass, it's not technically a weekly pass, it's a 7-day pass.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, and it's the same for the monthly one. So if you buy one mid-month or even towards the end of the month, you'd expect it to be like about 30 days, 31 days, but no, it will expire after however long in that month.
Yeah.
Which is really annoying. I got caught out on that when I first moved here.
Which doesn't really make sense from like a tourist perspective. If you come for a week, you don't always like start and end your vacation in a really logical manner.
Another thing is that the pickpocketing here is, I've never, touch wood, been affected by it.
Me neither.
But you hear so many horror stories and you see so many like shady people on the metro who obviously have some kind of agenda. Also, the metro staff, so the people who work on the metro, I find to be so rude. I don't know if
I think I've gotten one person who's been really nice, but I think everyone else has either been as like minimally cordial as possible or just rude. So I'll go back with a like now. Let's add a little more positivity here. One thing I love about Paris, and it kind of extends to French culture in general, is just the pride that people take in their food. And that's not saying like there's not still like terrible restaurants and terrible, food that you can find here, obviously. In general, French people are much more serious about meals. That's why meal times are often much longer. The produce, I have never actually shopped regularly at a supermarket that runs so much on seasonal produce. They're much more serious about their food in general, and they have like slightly, I think, higher expectations for it.
I do agree with you, but I have kind of two ideas now, one going by what you said, in terms of, it's amazing obviously that you've got seasonal produce and that it's going to be totally fresh, but if you want tahini or some kind of really specific item for a really specific dish, like chili flakes, good luck finding chili flakes in Paris other than in Marks and Spencer. If you want a particular ingredient for a particular dish, it can be really difficult to find sometimes, these specific items. But when it comes to restaurants, this may be just coming from my own personal experience because I grew up in England where there is very Indian population and a very kind of ingrained culture for eating Indian food. And I guess it's like they call it the second cuisine of the UK is Indian food.
I've heard that.
The Indian food that I've tried in Paris, and I've been to 3 restaurants, so obviously I've a very sheltered worldview, but obviously, this is my experience so far, is that it is so bad, shockingly bad. Like in England, we have these things called microwave meals. Do you have that in the US? What I had in Paris, it was worse quality than a bad in like microwave meal. It was so awful, and I paid quite a lot of money for it.
I can say something similar when it comes to like Mexican food or like a lot of the Latin American cuisine in general, although I know that's like geographically the US is much closer to that, so we've had a lot more influence from that, but Paris definitely does not have as good a selection.
But I guess they are quite bad in general at international food. But that's because
it depends though.
Yeah. I mean, but that's because, like what you said, they take so much pride in their food.
That is
French
true.
food.
One thing I have found that's very inconvenient, and I know this is also partially from an American perspective, the store times can be very inconvenient. It ranges from like the very basic complaint that I'm going to get out here is that they don't open on Sunday afternoons and evenings. On Sundays, either it's completely closed normally for a store, or it's only open in the morning. And in the UK, I found that somewhat, although I think most things were open till 5 on Sundays in the UK.
I think it depends if you're in a city or...
That's true.
How many times have you gone to go to the bank on a Monday and it's closed?
Really?
I've done so many times,
That's like the second part of this point, that things, I haven't noticed it with banks, but especially if it's privately owned and it's not like a big corporation like McDonald's, sometimes they can just close on random days. So you might walk to some place and it has a sign on the door that says closed today, randomly on like a Thursday.
Well, I know my local patisserie is quite a well-known, like, good one, just down the road from me. Basically, when they've sold everything, they close.
Oh wow.
So if you could go at random times in the afternoon and it will just be closed because they've sold everything.
Oh, that's crazy.
So the next one I've got is probably a little bit controversial. Hopefully it won't piss off too many people, but I feel like one of the main stereotypes about Parisians is their style and their fashion. I kind of feel like it's a lot more exaggerated in the stereotype than the actual reality.
What stereotype are you thinking about exactly?
That they're very stylish, fashionable.
Like the center of fashion is Paris, so it's known for, I guess, being quite exaggerated and forward-thinking and everything.
Whereas I actually feel like the fashion here is very, very safe.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Everything is so black and white. Everything is so monotone.
Like me.
We're right now looking very Parisian.
But yeah, I mean, I personally really enjoy that style on me, but I don't feel that, like you said, it's not really a very forward thinking. In London, fashion is very experimental, and I think the same can be said in Berlin. You see a lot of like new styles and new trends coming in, whereas in Paris you don't see a lot of people wearing the things that the American or the UK bloggers talking about, like everyone's wearing these bell sleeve shirts and stuff. You don't see any of that here. It's all very classic, and you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I personally prefer it, but
it's a bit boring to like look out at everyone around you, and there's tons of people because it's Paris. You do find like the same color palette being used basically by everybody. Who was I? Was I talking to you? I think it was one of my other friends, but they said they played a game with some of their friends who came, I don't remember where they were visiting from, but they weren't French, and they played a game trying to find as many people on the metro as possible who were not wearing black on their color palette. They could barely find anybody. Everyone had at least some piece of clothing on that was black.
Which is interesting because a lot of the big fashion houses are from here, and they do have a lot of interesting stuff, but it just doesn't permeate into the street style. The next thing is my personal experience as someone coming from London, but I find the cost of living here in Paris is incredibly cheap. So I pay, in terms of my rent, I pay about 40% less here for the same kind of apartment.
Yeah. So, London is known for being famously expensive, for everything.
It was for years the most expensive city in the world to live in, but now it's the second to Hong Kong.
Wow.
So I have a very, again, limited perspective on this, but
I find Paris extremely expensive for cost of living.
Really?
But you can definitely, like when you're looking at different prices, it makes such a huge difference if you're trying to find an apartment in like the center of Paris, or if it's near a metro station that's very widely used in a very busy area. Yeah, you're gonna pay tons more for a tiny little box, basically.
Yeah.
Just to end on a positive note, another little thing that I like, and it's something that everyone kind of knows about, but it's that you can find cheap wine very easily here. Yes. And I'm not just talking about like super cheap. I want to compare it to Tesco wine because that's my first experiences with like mega cheap supermarket wine. But at Tesco, something that will cost you £10 would probably cost you like €4 here. And just the culture towards wine is very different. Like cheap wine is, you just drink it at dinner and it's not a big deal, and you spend €5 on a bottle, you drink it at dinner, it's casual, versus in the US, I feel like when you break open a bottle of wine, it's a special occasion.
Yeah,
like,
sure. It's at least a Friday evening,
yeah,
like celebrating the weekend or something.
Yeah, and here just the culture towards wine and the accessibility towards good wine for very little. It's not something that only like fancy posh people get to enjoy all the time, which I love. So those were just a couple of our likes and dislikes from our 6-ish months of living in Paris. Let us know in the comments if you have any more to add, if you visited Paris or if you've lived in Paris especially. Make sure you check out Cheryl's channel. She talks a lot about, you want to just tell them what you talk about in your channel?
Quite simply, it is about, my channel name is Nonstop Paris, so a lot of my content is centered around my life here in Paris. I do a lot of vlogs and I guess like day in the lifestyle videos. I mean, I do work from home, so I do have some videos about like remote working, alternative lifestyle, stuff like that. But also I'm like into minimalism. I share a couple of my other interests on my channel, so yeah, it's fun. And we also did a video over on Cheryl's channel doing the Expat Tag. So if you want to check that out, you definitely should. The card will be that side. Which side? The card will be popping up somewhere. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will see you soon in another video. Thumbs up.